guest speaker in the Center for Second Language Studies this year. Dr. Bai is a professor of Chinese at Kenyon College, but he also trains TAs in the Department of Modern Languages and Literatures. He is currently the president of the Chinese Language Teachers Association and directs the Chinese language school at Middlebury College in Vermont during the summers. Dr. Bai is a specialist in foreign language pedagogy and computer-assisted language instruction, and for the last 2 days, we've been picking his brains, so we hope we haven't picked him completely clean, because today is the day he is going to share with you his talk entitled Theme-Based Language Teaching in the 21st Century. Please welcome Dr. Bai with you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here on this beautiful Friday afternoon, but I want to thank you to stay here on Friday afternoon. I know it's not easy, but I will try to be concise as possible, and I will talk for 30 to 40 minutes, and we'll have time for discussion. Before I talk, I want to thank Professor Scott and then Valerie and then Dr. Hughes and my colleagues in the Chinese for opening their doors for me to observe their classes. And I want to thank you all for your help to make my trip pleasant and my stay here wonderful. So today the talk is on theme-based language teaching and learning. I'm going to divide my talk into 5 sections, mostly on the last 3 parts. Can you hear me in the back? I'm using my teacher's voice. Okay. First of all, I'm going to talk about what is theme-based language teaching and learning and why, briefly on those 2 topics, and then move on to how do we make it happen? How do we apply this particular approach to teaching and learning into daily practices, either as a researcher or mostly as a teacher? So that's that. This is one of the definitions in terms of what is theme-based language teaching and learning. It's an approach to curriculum design that seeks to reach a balance between language and the content instruction with an emphasis on using the language, not talking about the language. So when you talk about the content, sometimes there's a risk, there's a danger of turning that into a content-based classes, and then you talk about the language instead of using the language. So how is content used here? I mean, even in the 60s, last century, people talk about the content-based language teaching and learning. So I'm going to talk about the development of that approach. And first, I want to say why it is so important to have this particular theme-based language teaching and learning, because basically we want to make language learning and teaching meaningful by making the content relevant to the students' intellectual levels. When we talk about theme-based, how to situate the language learning into meaningful content, usually it is easier to do at advanced level. Like today, I want to observe Yu Lao's class where she compared the legal systems of the 2 countries, China and the US. So she has sub-themes. It's a nice conversation, but as the conversation, the discussion goes on, people are practicing grammar. Students are practicing vocabulary, but it's done, the learning of vocabulary and the learning of the grammar is done within this interesting, meaningful, contextualized topics. So I think it is more difficult to do that for beginning and intermediate level, especially in the more difficult languages such as Chinese, Arabic. Those are called the type 4 languages, which takes much longer to reach to a particular proficiency level. If you compare that, the Foreign Service has divided the language into 4 types, like Dutch and Spanish being number 1, the most easy one, and Chinese, Arabic being the most difficult one. Takes a lot longer. So anyway, I think there's a need for making the language learning more meaningful by situating into content. And the other thing I want to say is this is especially important for adults learning foreign languages. Children, it's not necessarily important to situate meaningful and then sophisticated content areas, but especially for adults. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about theme-based language teaching and learning. It's basically to situate the learning of language, being grammar, vocabulary, the discourse structures, how to situate those learning into meaningful context in the rich content. So that's what we're talking about in terms of what is theme-based language teaching and learning. And this is a slide from my colleagues in Chinese, basic repetition of the last slide. And then let's talk about why. We know language is a system of symbols by which people of a social group communicate. I think we all know the importance of teaching vocabulary, of teaching grammar. If we believe in the generative approach to syntax, if we can teach our students those finite number of rules, and they can generate infinite number of sentences based on those rules of abstraction. So if you believe in that, I think the same thing applies for phonology. For if you teach them the foundation of those number of vowels and consonants, if the student can do it right. So what I'm saying is, I agree that teaching vocabulary, teaching of syntax, teaching of semantics, all that, those are important. But that has to be done in a meaningful context. In order to make it meaningful, again, for adult learners, good content is very important for people to situate the learning of language. I think this is pretty straightforward. You have taken linguistics, so we're talking about phonology, morphology, semantics, and so on and so forth. Those are the basic kind of infrastructure of the language learning. But that is important. But in order for that to happen, in order for the students to acquire that basic system, the teaching and learning has to be based in a meaningful context. That is one point I want to make why theme-based language teaching and learning. Again, for my Chinese colleagues, the repetition of what I have just said, speed reading, move on. If you look at the research in psychology, and we also find evidence why we want to make the teaching and learning theme-based. Basically, I'm making 2 sub-points here. When the learning of language is theme-based, when the presentation of coherent and meaningful information, when it's coherent and meaningful and theme-based, it makes the understanding faster and more effective. That's the first sub-point. The second one is it makes the memorization also more effective. So in other words, when the information is presented in a meaningfully, thematically coherent manner, people acquire them faster and remember them longer. So basically, if you look at the research in psychology, and that's what you see. If you look at the information processing theory, there's the automatic control from controlled processing to automatic processing. You also notice that when the learning is done meaningfully, coherently, in a theme-based type of situation, teaching and learning becomes more effective. So that's another area I want to use to emphasize the importance of teaching and learning of language in a meaningful way. And the other thing, if you look at the sociolinguistic and pragmatics, you will see that learning of a foreign language has to go in a meaningful and thematic-based situation. And I was going to go into more depth about what the study of pragmatics tells us in terms of language teaching and learning. I'm looking at the clock. I think I'm going to cut that part. I think very briefly, if you look at the study of pragmatics, you will see that learning and teaching of a foreign language has to be situated in a larger context. In other words, the choice of linguistic expressions is always affected by the contextual forces. The thing is, what is context? A context can be historical, it can be sociocultural, it can be geographical. So those factors come into play in learning and teaching of foreign languages. So again, you can see the importance of thematic-based kind of language teaching, the importance of that. So that is another thing I want to mention, why we should adopt the idea of theme-based language teaching and learning. Again, for my colleagues in Chinese, to practice speed reading. That's a summary of the last slide. And the other research we see is information processing theory done by Bill Van Patten and his colleagues, especially in Spanish and French, where they talk about basically, for me, this is an important step forward beyond what Krashen has been talking about. You know, Krashen has been talking about the importance of input, the comprehensive input, and I+1, and so on and so forth. But I think Bill Van Patten and his colleagues, I think, one step further and more clearly define what is quality input. So if you look at that research, you will feel that the importance of input, if the input is coherent, is theme-based, is more meaningful. If you look at Bill Van Patten's original research with Spanish, the quality of input affects not only understanding, but also long-term memory. So if you look at that part of the research, you will see the importance of situating learning of a language into more meaningful context. So in the good old days, when I was learning English as a second language, we do a lot of drilling at the sentence level, not necessarily think about the thematic way of processing language learning. So I'm not going to go into details. I just want to summarize some of the research evidence to show why theme-based language teaching and learning is important. And for my colleagues in Chinese, we have at Middlebury College, we just produced a book very similar to the idea of structured input. It's based on how to deal with the teaching of grammar in a meaningful context, especially in the stage of input. We're no longer using the traditional way of grammar explanation followed by kind of graphics of illustrating the structure. Instead, we are using a kind of interactive approach to present the grammatical structure through meaningful interaction. And that is in Chinese. I'm not going to show that example. The point I want to make here is how do you make the input more meaningful, more interactive? So for people in French and Spanish and English, the book by Andrew Farley from, I think he is a student of Bill Van Patten, a professor from Notre Dame. He wrote the book called The Structured Input. So if you are interested about the teaching of grammar within this particular framework, that is a wonderful reference to use. So the last thing I want to say about the importance of theme-based language teaching and learning is a body of research by Michael Long and Rod Ellis on the idea of focus on form. Have you read about, I'm sure probably in the methodology class you've read about the difference between Krashen's approach to language acquisition is what? Is focus on meaning, right? In the good old days, think about the audiolingual school of teaching. Those are called focus on forms. And what Michael Long and Rod Ellis is proposing is to focus on form. Let me give an example to illustrate what we're talking about. This one is in Chinese, but I'm going to explain that. But it's going to be, this is a summary of the research on focus on form. And basically, we're talking about where the primary attention is placed. So if you think about the good old book, The Natural Approach by Stephen Krashen and Tracy Terrell, that's for a while, that's a wonderful book for language pedagogy. It's totally focused on meaning, natural input. What is the problem? The problem is sometimes you forget about the nature of language. For instance, certain grammatical structures are learned earlier than others. People's processing capacity is limited at a particular point. If you look at the psychology research, sometimes if you give students too much, what happens is that there's an overburden of processing capacity. It slows the learning down. So if you think about natural approach, the curriculum and the lesson is designed in such a way that the focus is on communication, is on content, without thinking about the linguistic aspect, the complexity of the linguistic aspect of the whole thing. So focus on forms, on the other hand, is your primary attention. The student's primary attention is on form. I'm going to give you an example to illustrate that. So what Michael Long and Rod Ellis suggest is to have some kind of focus on form. Basically, as a professor, as a teacher of a foreign language, you want to design your instruction and learning in such a way that at a certain point, people are still focusing on the acquisition of one particular form, but it's done in such a way that students' primary attention is on communication, is on meaning negotiation, is on the meaningful part. Let me give you an example. In Chinese, when we teach the comparative structure, this is what we used to do. And in some way, this is what we are doing now, is to give the students a structure. Noun 1, comparative word, noun 2, adjective, and have students practice the grammar. So if you look at the sentence number 1, comparing the learning of Chinese and French, number 2 goes on. I'll give you an example. Another example is comparing dancing and listening to music. Another one compares this piece of clothing and that piece of clothing. Another one is compare who is richer. So it's a pretty good grammatical practice. But if you think about it, the questions are not coherently related. They are not built around a particular theme. So if we make a little tiny change, and then we do the comparison this way. So students come to the class and say, okay, today we're going to talk about the hobbies. What do you like? And you, and you, and you. So this is practice vocabulary. What do you like? Cooking. You? Music. You? Television. So this is a way to practice vocabulary. But remember, the student's primary attention is on talking about the hobbies. And after the vocabulary practice, and you present this picture, you say, I feel cooking is more interesting than television. Therefore, I often spend my weekend cooking. So that is an example. And then this time, I'm going to ask people to talk about their preference using this particular activity. So we're still practicing the comparison structure. But the student's primary attention is on the topic of hobbies. So this is what I mean by focus on form. You are controlling the how much they are learning and what they are learning grammatically. But it's done in such a way that people are not aware in some way they are doing grammar, but they're talking about their hobbies. So from this one, from the hobby, you can move on to another topic, to another theme. So that's what I mean by focus on form. It's a kind of, learning a foreign language and teaching a foreign language has something in common. We're talking about it over lunch. Teaching a good teacher has to be a reflective teacher. It takes a long time to become a good teacher. No matter how wonderful the teacher is, you cannot become a wonderful teacher of foreign languages overnight. It just takes time. You have to reflect on that stuff. If you think about the focus on form, it's basically kind of evolved from the focus on forms to focus on meaning. Now they're kind of combine the strengths of both into a newer framework. I don't like the idea of revolution. I think knowledge is cumulative. I take that as more like evolution than revolution. So I think we're just learning from the good old days and make it even better. So I think the way I look at the focus on form is they look at the strengths of both ways of thinking and came an even better one, a stronger model. So I have some more examples. If you when when I teach a particular expression, you can also do that by creating different kinds of themes. And this is another one for the comparison. And the explanation, the instruction is, everybody wants to hear about the positive comments. And I want you to praise the other person, or praise the other person's dogs. That's perhaps either comparison or the phrase, yo, yo. And then here's another one for the practice of the Guo structure. It's very similar to the English have done something. So you can talk about traveling, you can talk about studying experience, dining experience, and so on and so forth. So this is the part, I'm going to skip this output hypothesis. So that's the first two parts, what is and why. In the next 15 minutes or 10 minutes, let me talk about how do we apply, how we are doing at 3 levels: curriculum design, material development, and classroom practice. How are we doing in terms of the applying this particular approach into actual practice? The first thing is the College Board, the AP language courses. German and French just adopted a new model. And then the next is Spanish. And then it's going to be Italian, Chinese, and Japanese. And then they gathered about 50 scholars in language pedagogy, and then they come up with some universal themes. And this is this is on their college board AP Central website. You don't have to write them down. You can go there and check them out. So if you want to make language teaching and learning in terms of curriculum design more thematic based, the first thing you want to talk about is what are the themes. So those are the 6 universal themes, and then they're further divided into sub-themes. So this is there are 2 national projects going on nowadays. One is Actful's 21st Century Skills, and the other one is the core what's that? The across the states there's it's about the standards to look at how we are doing. Again, they're advertising. I think that they're trying to encourage us, the teachers, to think about the teaching of learning within this kind of thematic-based approach. So once you decide on the themes, and so this is the process of thinking in terms of design of instruction within this framework. You come with a particular theme, and then the next thing you determine the learning outcome. Okay, let's say the theme of family. So what should we do at a particular stage? In Chinese, we gathered 8 scholars. I'm one of them, basically the presidents of CLTA and the class. So these are 2 organizations for teaching Chinese as foreign language, both at the college level and the pre-college level. So we gather together and try to come up with some kind of standard-based learning outcomes. So within one theme, across the levels, we come up with a particular instructional objectives. So the theme, the instructional objectives, and then the next one is pre-assessment. So to find out what our students can do and what they know and what they are able to do against the specified instructional objectives. And then plan instruction. We also develop a set of learning scenarios. I can give you one example for the learning scenario, like my hero and my model as a learning scenario. It's like, how do you design a learning unit within this particular framework? That's theme-based language teaching and learning. And so very briefly here, what I've been trying to say is that when we apply the theme-based language teaching and learning model into curriculum design, and this is what you can do. You start with the theme, and then you come up with the level appropriate learning objective, and then you pre-assess what the students know. In some way, it's kind of learner needs analysis. And then you plan the instruction, the idea of learning scenarios, and then performance-based assessment of expected learning outcomes. So this is there's a book called there's an idea of, I'm sure you learn about backward design, learning by design, that book. So if you want to know more about the backward design idea, which is start with the theme and the learning objectives, and then the planning for the instruction. So, so this part I want to illustrate how we can kind of apply this theme-based model in curriculum design. So this is what I'm trying to say. Yes. Yeah, so that can be used as the basic stuff for you to develop materials. So that leads me to material development. And we at Middlebury College, in my graduate program, under the support of the StarTalk, we developed a set of learning units. I'm going to show you one, maybe two if I have time. But they are all available online, free of charge. And for instance, we start with, for people who don't read Chinese, I'm going to walk you through that. We start with the theme, which is contemporary life. And the sub-theme is about the sightseeing, traveling. And so we start with a set of learning objectives. The learning objectives is no longer grammar-based. We're not saying we're going to teach you 25 grammatical structures and 800 words. No. The learning objectives are based on this little chart. I'm sure you are familiar with this little creature, right? Have you all seen this? Basically, the way I see it, again, evolution, is reorganize what we have been doing for thousands of years in a new model. We're still teaching vocabulary. We're still teaching listening, the 4 skills, but it's situated in such a way that it's more focused on communication. So this is a conceptualization of communication. This is communicative competence. So it's divided into interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational communication. So if you look at the AP tests, they are all organized like that. Either the test or the curriculum for AP languages is all organized like that. So if you look at, I think we went through the same process. If you examine the teaching of Chinese, at the very beginning, it's basically based on the elements of language. Chapter 1, nouns. Chapter 2, verbs. Chapter 3, relative clauses. I bought a book published in 1870 or something when they teach Greek and Latin. That's how they organize their stuff. Verbs, nouns, the parts of speech. From that, for Chinese, we went on from that kind of approach to skill-based. Skill-based, I'm talking about 听说读写, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and now we have the typing. So that's what I mean by skill-based. And from there, we become more functional. So now we're organizing the teaching and learning. Interpretive, basically, we're talking about listening comprehension and the reading comprehension. That's what we're talking about. That's interpretive communicative competence. Interpersonal, we're talking about two-way communication. Interpersonal can be speaking, or can I write you an email, you respond to me. So that's called interpersonal communication. Presentational, you can either in the form of speaking, giving a presentation, or in the form of writing, such as writing a report. So that is the framework we have been using in developing learning objectives. So the learning objectives is interpersonal communicative competence, what the student can do in terms of interpersonal communication and in terms of interpretive communication, and goes on from communication to culture to connection to the 5 C's. You all know that. I'm not going to repeat. Basically, you have the culture, communication, what else? Connection, communities, and comparison. So we design our learning objectives based on the 5C model. So from there, we design our instruction. What do we do in terms of material development, and what learning activities are we going to use? So this is a part of instruction and learning. And then there's assessment. We have both formative and the summative assessment in the model. So this will be like one example to illustrate the idea of theme-based language teaching and learning in terms of material development. So that is one particular lesson. We have developed about 20 lessons for this project. And move on to the daily classroom activities. Like this is one little thing that my student developed. And this is engage students in in cooking. And basically, they are teaching the vocabulary in about the food and the vegetable and so on, and the teaching of one particular grammatical structure. I mean, my colleague all know the bar structure. So it's one of the most difficult structure where you use to give instructions. Some people call this structure as a disposal structure. So put this over there, have this disappear, and that particular grammatical structure. So they are teaching this structure in such a way that students are learning how to make, how to cook, and how to eat Chinese dumplings. As the conversation goes on, that particular bar structure is used repeatedly because it applies naturally in this particular context. So this is a presentation, and then after that, and then for them to practice, this is the teaching part, and this is the practice part. So at the beginning part, people are learning how to make the dumplings, how to cook, how to eat. It's kind of interactive way of presenting the materials, but now they're on their own. They have described picture using the same structure. So this is like one example at a classroom level. We'll talk about the curriculum level, the material development. Now I'm giving you just a few examples to show what we can do at the classroom level, how to make the classroom activities kind of theme-based. And I have a few more examples. Like this one, for instance, is a practice of, this is from one of my colleagues, of teaching the vocabulary related to romance and marriage and things like that, talking about the vocabulary, and then the structure is comparing the different customs in China and in the US. Again, because it's focused on a small theme, the practice of vocabulary and the practice of grammar is all done within a meaningful discussion on the comparison of the marriage customs in both cultures. So, so this part, very quickly, I showed you how the idea of theme-based language teaching and learning can be applied at a curriculum level, material development, and the classroom practice. So those are the main points I want to show. So conclusion, I think basically, as I said, a good language teacher is a reflective teacher. So I think we need to think about how this particular approach can help us do a better job. By that I mean, how do we help our students learn faster and more effectively? So that's what we're talking about. Maybe we should think about this idea of theme-based approach and how that can be incorporated into our research and teaching. So with that, maybe we can spend like a few minutes discussion or question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I know that for the people in the methods class, there is an echo here. We're hearing some of the themes that are the same.
Yeah.
So we thank you. Let me say, I am looking at the clock, and it's 2:04. I'd like you to ask 3 questions, and Todd will do that. And then we have a small reception downstairs, so you can speak with Dr. Bai in a more informal setting. So how about 3 well-placed questions while I run to make sure, and I hope you join us downstairs for a little reception.
So, any questions?
I have
Yeah.
a question. What is the difference between what you call theme-based method and content-based method?
I think, again, I remember 1989, I was at a conference talking to Joanne Crandall. At that time, she was the president of TESOL. And then she was one of the leaders in content-based instruction and learning. I think content-based basically will also talk about how to balance the content and language practice. I think theme-based is kind of based on that, but it becomes more systematic. Now, if you look at, if you Google thematic units in Spanish, you come up with a lot of ready-made stuff you can use. So it has a particular framework, especially after the College Board, the framework on the thematic-based language. It becomes more systematic, more precise in terms of the curriculum framework than the content-based instruction and learning. It's related, yeah. Any other questions? That's fine. That's my own personal preference.
So really that's more of just a
Suggestion. Yeah. It's not the Bible of the. Yeah. I think, but thank you for the good comment. I think when we design a curriculum, we often start with a learner needs analysis. Not even before the learning objectives. We want to look at the learners. What do they need? So when we talk about when we design a curriculum, when we think about the learner's needs, sometimes maybe you can think about the 21st century real life skills. Sometimes you want to keep that in mind. Like the current research on the 21st century skills and also the Common Core standards, people notice a few things that we have not done well. One is the higher learning skills. Like it's like we teach them a lot of some kind of basic, like in reading, for instance. Mostly still stays in the literal comprehension. What about the higher level, like inference, the creative reading, critical analysis? Those higher learning skills are not done enough in the teaching of learning foreign language. That's one. The other thing is the use of technology. And people also notice that is one thing we should do more. And the third thing they notice is the idea of collaboration. Those are all real-life skills. Should we take that into consideration when we design a curriculum? But I agree with you. You can start with a learning objective that target for that particular group of learners, and then you can choose the themes. But for the college, the way I put the themes first is because if you look at the design of College Board AP courses, and you have to fulfill a certain number of themes. That's why I started with the theme before the objectives. But you are right. And you can start with objectives, and you don't have to choose all 6 themes. Maybe you can choose 3 for that particular period of time. Thank you for the comment.